In late 1989, a 24-year-old kid stepped out of a white Mercedes in Harlem, wearing a full-length mink and peeling $100 bills into the hands of everyone on the block. His name was Rich Porter. While kids his age were figuring out their lives, this kid from a housing project with broken lights had built a drug empire that generated $250,000 every single day. The New York Police Department couldn't catch him. Federal indictments couldn't touch him. Rival crews couldn't kill him. He was the untouchable king of New York before he even turned 21. But the thing that finally brought his empire crashing down wasn't the police or a cartel. It was a $500,000 ransom note for his 12-year-old brother, a child snatched off the street to settle a debt Rich never even owed. The truth about who actually took him is one of the most cold-blooded betrayals in gangland history. Harlem in the early 1980s was a war zone dressed up as a neighborhood. The crack epidemic did not creep into Upper Manhattan. It kicked the door down. Every stoop, every corner, every vacant lot became real estate, and not the kind you find in a broker's office, the kind you defend with a pistol. Richard Porter was born on July 25, 1965, and he grew up in the Wagner houses on East 124th Street. His mother worked, his father was absent. The usual origin story for a generation of kids who looked outside their apartment windows and saw the only economy that was actually hiring. Rich was small as a kid, quiet, the type who watched everything and said little, but he had a quality that cannot be taught: charisma. The kind that made older dudes trust him and younger kids want to follow him. By age 12, he was already running errands for local dealers, fetching food, carrying messages, learning the architecture of the game from the ground floor. By age 14, he was bagging up product in a stash apartment. By age 16, he was buying his own weight. And that is where the story of Rich Porter separates from every other project kid who touched a package and thought he was somebody. Rich did not just sell crack. He studied the business of selling crack. He watched how the older dealers lost money through sloppiness, through addiction, through trusting the wrong people. He watched how they got knocked by the police through patterns, through predictability, through staying in one spot too long. Rich absorbed every lesson like tuition he would never have to repay. His classroom was the streets between Lenox Avenue and 7th Avenue, and his professors were every dealer who got rich before him and every dealer who got killed before him. By 1984, Rich Porter was 19 years old and running his own crew. Not a big crew, not yet. A handful of workers, a couple of reliable runners, and a connect that kept the pipeline flowing. But here's what set Rich apart from every other teenager with a package in Harlem: the presentation. Rich Porter understood something that most street-level dealers never figured out. Image is currency. He was meticulous about how he looked, how his crew looked, how the operation looked from the outside. While other dealers were wearing dirty Timberlands and oversized hoodies, Rich was in tailored leather, designer jeans, gold that was real and heavy, not plated, not hollow. He drove cars that made people stop on the sidewalk, not to intimidate, to advertise. Every outfit was a billboard. Every car was a commercial. The message was simple: this is what success looks like. Come work for me. And they did. Kids from Wagner, kids from the St. Nicholas houses, kids from Jefferson who had no other options lined up to be part of Rich Porter's operation. He paid well. He paid on time. He did not short anybody. In a world where most bosses skimmed off their workers or paid in product instead of cash, Rich ran a clean payroll. That loyalty was not bought. It was earned. And it created something most Harlem operations never had: stability. But Rich was not building alone. Two names need to be mentioned here because you cannot tell this story without them: Ozzie Faison and Alpo Martinez. The three of them became the most famous drug-dealing trio in Harlem history, maybe in all of New York history, each one representing a different philosophy of the game. Ozzie was the thinker, the one who saw the end game before it arrived, the one who would eventually walk away. Alpo was the wild card, charismatic and reckless, a shooter with a smile who made friends as easily as he made enemies. And Rich sat in the middle, the businessman, the one everybody trusted, the one who held the trio together. By 1985, Rich Porter's territory was locked. 142nd to 149th Street, the strip they called the Golden Corridor. Think about what that means for a 20-year-old kid. 7 blocks of prime Harlem real estate, every corner generating revenue, every building in the zone either a stash house, a distribution point, or a lookout post. The money was obscene. At their peak, the trio was grossing over $1 million a week, and Rich spent it like a man who believed tomorrow was never promised, because in Harlem in 1985, it was not. The lifestyle was staggering. Multiple luxury vehicles parked outside Wagner houses, a wardrobe that rivaled any entertainer's. Rich was known to walk into Dapper Dan's boutique on 125th Street and spend $10,000 to $15,000 in a single visit. Custom leather jackets with Louis Vuitton prints, Gucci patterns stitched into bomber coats, the kind of clothing that did not exist in any store because Dapper Dan made it exclusively for the elite of the streets. Rich was one of his best customers. He ordered outfits for his entire crew, matching sets, coordinated looks, a visual statement that said, "This is not a random group of kids. This is an organization." And the generosity. That is where the legend really lives. Rich Porter fed the neighborhood, not metaphorically, literally. Thanksgiving turkeys for every family in Wagner houses. Christmas gifts for kids who had nothing under the tree. Back to school supplies in September. Sneakers for teenagers who could not afford them. Funeral costs for families who could not bury their dead. He was not doing it for show, or at least that is what the people who received it believed. The community loved him because the community needed him. When the city abandoned Harlem, when the schools crumbled and the hospitals closed and the jobs disappeared, Rich Porter was the social safety net. He was the economy. But here's what most people miss about the Rich Porter story. The generosity was real, but it was also strategic. Every turkey he gave away bought silence. Every pair of sneakers bought loyalty. Every funeral he paid for bought a family that would never cooperate with police. Rich understood that community goodwill was the best security system money could buy. Better than guns, better than lookouts, better than any alarm. When the cops came around asking questions, nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. Nobody knew anybody named Rich. By 1987, Rich Porter was 22 years old and operating at a level that most Harlem dealers 3 times his age never reached. His connect was solid, his crew was disciplined, his territory was uncontested. His money was flowing so fast that hiding it became its own full-time job. Apartments rented under fake names stuffed with cash. Relatives holding money they were told never to spend. Safe deposit boxes in banks across 3 states. The problem with making $250,000 a day is that you eventually run out of places to put it. And the cars. Lord, the cars. Rich Porter's automotive collection was legendary, even by drug dealer standards. Mercedes-Benz 560 SEL, BMW 7 Series, Corvettes, Range Rovers before Range Rovers were fashionable. He would buy a car, drive it for a month, give it to someone in the crew, and buy another one. Vehicles were disposable to him, accessories, not assets. He had a white Mercedes that became iconic on the streets of Harlem. A car people would point at and say that it was Rich Porter's ride, as if they were identifying a head of state's motorcade. But the game never stays still. And the thing about standing at the top is that everybody below you is either looking up with admiration or looking up with a scope. By 1988, the crack epidemic was at full fury. Harlem was producing millionaires and corpses at the same rate. The violence was escalating, the competition was intensifying, and the federal government was finally paying attention to what was happening above 110th Street. The NYPD was running operations, building cases, flipping low-level workers. The DEA was starting to map networks, and the Internal Revenue Service was asking a question that no drug dealer ever wants to hear. Where is this kid getting his money? Rich saw the pressure building. He was too smart not to. He started talking about getting out, investing in legitimate businesses, maybe music, maybe real estate, something that could wash the money and build a future that did not end in handcuffs or a coffin. Ozzy Faison was having the same conversations. The two of them would sit in Ozzy's apartment and talk about exit strategies, about how to step back without getting stepped on. The problem with leaving the game is that the game does not accept resignations. Your customers do not find a new supplier quietly. Your workers do not transition to new management peacefully. Your enemies do not let you retire in comfort. Leaving is the most dangerous decision a kingpin can make because it signals weakness to every predator in the ecosystem. And then there was Alpo. While Rich and Ozzy were whispering about getting out, Alpo Martinez was getting deeper in. He was spinning recklessly, moving violently, making enemies like it was a hobby. The triangle was losing its balance. Alpo's behavior was drawing heat, the kind of heat that does not discriminate between the reckless and the careful, the kind that burns everyone in the vicinity. By 1989, the cracks in the empire were visible to anyone paying attention. Rich was still making money, still running the strip, still wearing the mink and driving the Benz, but the fear was there. Not fear of the police, not fear of rivals, fear of the inevitable. He had been in the game since he was 12 years old, 13 years. He had watched dozens of people he knew get killed. He had been to more funerals than birthday parties. He knew the math, and the math never lies. And then December 1989 happened, and the math came to collect. Rich had a younger brother named Donald Porter. Everybody called him Donald. He was 12 years old. 12. A child. He liked basketball, liked video games, liked following his older brother around the neighborhood like a shadow. Donald was not in the game. He was not selling anything, not running anything, not involved in anything beyond being a kid in Harlem who happened to have a famous older brother. There was a man named William Preacher Day. He was the brother of Rich and Donald's mother's longtime boyfriend, effectively Donald's uncle. He had a dispute with Rich, or more accurately, he had a grievance. Day believed Rich owed him money from a transaction that had gone sideways. Whether the debt was real or manufactured depends on who you ask. What is not debatable is what happened next. Day could not get to Rich. Rich was insulated, protected, surrounded by people who would kill for him. So Day made a decision that violated every code the streets ever had. He kidnapped Donnell, 12 years old, grabbed off the street in broad daylight, taken to an apartment, and held while Day demanded $500,000 in ransom from Rich. To prove he had the boy, Day cut off one of Donnell's fingers and left it in a McDonald's bathroom for Rich to find. Rich was desperate. He scrambled to gather the money, pulling from every source he had, but he could only come up with roughly $300,000. He was short. He went to Alpo to ask for help making up the difference, and Alpo refused. Because Rich could not produce the full amount in time, Day killed the boy. Donald never came home. Day murdered a 12-year-old child because the ransom came up short. The body was found weeks later in a garbage bag near Orchard Beach in the Bronx. Dumped, discarded like the life meant nothing. Because today it did not. This was not business. This was not the game. This was evil in its purest form. But Rich never learned what happened to Donald. His brother was still missing when the next blow came. January 3rd, 1990. That is the night Rich Porter was sitting in a car on a Harlem street. Alpo Martinez pulled up next to him. They knew each other. They were friends. Rich had no reason to be afraid. According to Alpo's own confession, he killed Rich because Rich had been secretly overcharging him for cocaine. Rich had found a cheaper connection, but was charging Alpo a higher wholesale price and pocketing the difference. When Alpo discovered his best friend was price gouging
gouging him, he felt betrayed. Alpo leaned in and shot Rich Porter multiple times, at close range, no warning, no argument. Rich Porter was 24 years old when he died. He died never knowing what happened to his little brother. Donald's body was not found until nearly a month later. Rich went to his grave with that question unanswered, and that may be the cruelest detail in the story defined by cruelty. The news hit Harlem like a bomb. Not just because Rich was dead, but because of who killed him. The betrayal was so total, so complete, that it rewrote the rules of how people in the game trusted each other. If Alpo could kill Rich, then nobody was safe from anybody. The paranoia that followed was suffocating. Crews fractured, alliances dissolved. The entire social fabric of Harlem's drug economy tore along the seam that Alpo's bullet ripped open. Ozzie Faison got the news and felt something he had been feeling for years crystallize into certainty. He was done. He had already been pulling away from the game since 1987, when he was shot multiple times during a stash house robbery that left several other people dead. He barely survived. That near-death experience caused him to step back and rethink his life. Rich's murder was the final confirmation. The game had taken Rich, had taken Donald, had taken too many people he loved. Ozzie stepped away and eventually became one of the most vocal critics of the life he once lived, co-creating the documentary Game Over that told the story of Rich, Alpo, and himself with an honesty that most street narratives never achieve. Alpo did not last long after Rich's murder. His recklessness accelerated. More bodies, more heat, more attention from law enforcement. He was arrested, charged with 14 murders, and faced the possibility of the death penalty. And then Alpo did what Alpo always did. He calculated the angle. He flipped and became a federal informant. He cooperated with the government, testified against associates, and received a reduced sentence. The man who murdered his best friend bought his way out of death row by selling out everyone else he knew. He served 25 years and was released in 2015 into witness protection. New name, new city, new life. But the streets have a memory that witness protection cannot erase. October 31st, 2021, Alpo Martinez was shot and killed while sitting in a car in Harlem. The same neighborhood, the same streets, the same ending he gave to Rich Porter 3 decades earlier. The game collects. Rich Porter's funeral drew thousands. Harlem turned out for its fallen king the way Harlem always does, with grief and gold and too many flowers to fit in one room. The casket was opened. He wore white. The church overflowed. People stood outside in the cold because there was no room inside. And they were not leaving without saying goodbye. Kids he had bought sneakers for, mothers whose rent he had paid, workers who had made their living on his strip. They all came because Rich Porter, for all the poison he sold, was the only person who ever invested in their block. His mother buried 2 sons, Donald at 12, Rich at 24. The weight of that is beyond anything a narrator can frame or a listener can absorb. It simply is, and it stands there in the story like a wall that nothing can get past. The legacy of Rich Porter lives on in ways he never anticipated. The 2002 film Paid in Full was based on the lives of Rich, Ozzie, and Alpo, with the characters renamed but the story unmistakable. Wood Harris played the Ozzie Faison character Ace. Mickey Pfeiffer played the Rich Porter character Mitch. Cameron played the Alpo character Rico. The film became a cult classic, a cultural touchstone for a generation of kids who were too young to have seen the real thing but old enough to understand what it represented. Every rapper who references Harlem royalty is referencing Rich Porter, whether they know it or not.